Chapter 26, Gaining Fame. Daniel's body was overflowing with power. The purity of his naturally produced ki was so high that in comparison, he believed that the ki his body had produced so far had been an incomplete version of his actual ki. His spirit wasn't any less impressive. In fact, he felt like his spirit connection with the spiritual plane was much clearer than before, and the spiritual essence drawn from it was so pure that if Daniel tried to use any of the basic spells he knew, he would consume very little of it. Feeling the hilt of his sword with his left hand, he decided to test his newly acquired strength. So he unsheathed it and focused his ki on the edge of his sword. The edge of the sword started to shine with a pale sky blue light. Daniel walked towards the biggest boulder he could find and, sword in hand, made a slashing motion with his arm. A deep gash appeared on the surface of the 3 meters tall boulder. Daniel hadn't felt any resistance coming from the stone, as the sword went through it like a hot knife through butter. Unfortunately, Daniel still wasn't able of pushing his ki further than his own body or the body of the weapon he was holding. Therefore, the sword could only cut what it came into direct contact with. Splitting ki had more advanced stages to it, which would allow him to expand the blade through ki and even send slashes of pure ki through air. But with Daniel's current mastery of splitting ki, he was only able to sharpen the sword's edge. Daniel sheathed his sword with a satisfied look. He then closed his eyes and focused on pushing the spiritual essence within his body through his feet and into the surrounding ground. At an impressive speed, the rocks in the surroundings started to move and converge into a large pile, which a wave of soft soil covered right away. After less than 20 seconds, the pile of rocks and soil had shifted in place and taken a humanoid shape. This golem's humanoid shape, if compared to the previous golem Daniel had summoned, was much more defined. While the previous golem looked like a giant made out of rocks and soil with simple limbs, this one had a head, fingers, toes, and a bone structure made out of solid rock. Its face was still smooth and devoid of any human resemblance, but at least it was shaped like a face. Daniel looked at the 2 small rank 4 beast cores, and after thinking for a moment, he decided not to attempt to break through to the 4th rank. He had realized that his speed was too impressive, and if he were to cultivate from the peak of rank 3 to the 4th rank in just a few days, someone would pick up on it sooner or later. After looking up, Daniel noticed that the light coming through the hole in the roof was that of early evening. He didn't know how long he had been cultivating, but since he felt like he hadn't eaten for days, he believed that more than a day had passed. He needed to find a way out of this cave as soon as possible. The first thing he did was to rip one of his sleeves off and wrap it around a small rod that he had made out of stone. He then soaked it with the scorpion's fatty meat and made a rudimentary torch which he placed on the ground, before unsheathing his sword and one of his knives. He sat right next to the torch and started to wet the sword's unsharpened side with the knife's edge. His first few tries generated no sparks, but the more he tried, the warmer the blade became. He kept trying faster and faster until finally a few sparks flashed past his fingers and disappeared in the air. It took him a few minutes to manage to ignite the torch, but instead of getting up and start exploring the cave, he shoved his hand inside the flame, and activated time is precious. For the next 5 minutes, Daniel focused on the warmth on his skin, looked at the sinuous movements of the flame, and tried to understand the workings of fire essence. The torch was rudimentary and only had the scorpion's fatty innards to keep it lit, so after less than 10 minutes after it was ignited, the flame had already extinguished. Luckily, thanks to the system's help, 10 minutes were more than enough for Daniel to understand the principles of fire essence. While still sitting in a lotus position, Daniel forced his spiritual essence out of his palm. He focused on the familiar warmth and wavy movements of a flame, and after a few moments, a small fire lit on his palm. The fire waved quietly, growing in size above Daniel's skin for a good minute. It then detached from it and floated in the air steadily. The flame kept becoming bigger and bigger until, when it reached the size of a human's head, it finally stopped. The floating flame required Daniel's commands to move, similarly to the way the stone golem was controlled. Unlike the stone golem, the flame was considered a summoned beast. More precisely, a flaming wisp. Meanwhile, in Fury, within the decommissioned hotel, was a large and elegant room. Inside this room, two old men were sitting while facing each other. One of them was the previous master-at-arms of the Careless Kingdom, while the other was an old man which, if compared to the hotel owner, looked much closer to their real age. They two old men were both in their mid-70s. This old-looking man wore a loose white robe, with two small golden cauldrons patched on his shoulders and a bigger one sewn to his left waist area. From his body came a pungent smell which would make one's nose curl in discomfort. Whoever would smell this odor would immediately recognize this man as a powerful alchemist. The two old men were having a conversation while sipping tea from a set of very refined teacups. "So he hasn't come back yet," said the old alchemist. The retired master-at-arms' brows furrowed and responded in a not too cordial tone. "I still don't buy that crap about wanting to thank him for saving your granddaughter." "Ma, what reason do I have to lie to you?" The old alchemist didn't take the rudely put comment too seriously. After all, the two were old friends. "Sure, laugh away. In the 50 years Eve ain't known you, you have never bothered to thank anyone that helped you. The best you did was to send them a few pill, or a chest of gold," commented the master-at-arms bitterly. The alchemist's eyes rolled back and responded with an annoyed voice. "Again, with the price's wedding? I thought you would have forgotten about that by now. Haven't I sent you a chest of gold? That wasn't even worth a fourth of the price of the present. You lousy alchemist." He then turned away and refused to comment further. A few quiet minutes went by as the two sipped tea in silence. "Seriously, the kid is a prodigy in everything that regards martial cultivation. Why are you looking for him?" the master-at-arms said seriously. The old alchemist smiled wryly and said that kid cultivated from the early rank 2 to the peak of rank 3 and learned how to use stone skin in a single night. He then sipped his tea and added he is a spiritual cultivation prodigy as well. "How do we solve this?" The master-at-arms' eyes widened in shock when he heard the words of the old alchemist. "Are you serious?" he asked right after swallowing the mouthful of tea he had in his mouth. The old alchemist simply nodded, and while looking at the content of his teacup, he said a talent corpse has no future. For now, let's hope he isn't dead. Back to the large cavern underneath the Sinlia's mountain range, Daniel had found a way to leave from the way he came. He had decided to summon one golem after the other and order them to take the shape of small sets of stairs. He would then give up the earth essence's control, so that they would turn into inanimate solid constructions. After a bit of trial and error, and a few heavy falls against the solid rock, he managed to reach only 6 meters below the hole on the roof of TH Cave. "I can make it," said Daniel, while avoiding to look down. A fall like that wouldn't have killed a rank 4 beast, and probably not even the new and improved him, but there were no doubts that he would break a few bones if he did. Plus, there were no lakes underneath to grant him a softer landing point than stone. He took a few deep breaths, and after mustering the courage, he bent his knees and took a huge leap upwards. The stone and earth's stairs immediately crumbled under the weight. If one were to look from the edge of the hole, they would notice a thin arm appearing inside it, then disappearing the next moment. Daniel hadn't made it outside. But luckily, he had managed to grab a protruding stone with the tip of his fingers and avoid a painful fall. He then climbed up slowly and managed to roll out of the massive hole. With his back pressed against the edge of the chasm, he took a few deep breaths and shook the tension off his shoulders. He then got back up on his feet and started walking towards the base camp. Base camp 2311 AM guard was sitting quietly next to the wooden signs at the edge of the base camp. His eyes were half closed, as he was in the process of falling asleep. His large greatsword was laying on the side of his right leg and was about to slip and fall on the ground. Before the guard could manage to fall asleep, a dark silhouette, which seemed to be approaching the base camp, appeared out of the blue. Before the guard even finished opening his eyes, he grabbed his weapon and sprung up on his feet. He then shouted, "Who's there?" The silhouette drew closer. The guard started to get nervous, so it shouted once again, "Who is TH?" But before he could finish, he realized that the silhouette belonged to a young man in his early teens. The closer the silhouette got, the more details was the guard able to see. The young man's body was thin but well-defined, and his skin was completely covered in dirt. His clothes were in tatters. The only parts that weren't ruined were his belt, on which a long sword hanged on the side, and a leather strap wrapped around his left thigh, which contained a set of sheathed throwing knives. Various guards on patrol heard the sudden screams and approached the entrance of the canyons. They then joined the first guard and stood next to him, observing the approaching young man. The young man was, of course, Daniel. Daniel approached step after step, noticing the guards crowding the entrance of the canyon. What Daniel didn't know was that he had become kind of famous lately. Apparently, an unknown party of hunters had come back from their hunting ground with one of their members missing. The party confirmed the presence of more than one rank 4 beast within the canyon, and had also requested the head hunter to send a searching party to look for the lost member. Usually, they would have gotten paid for the information and rejected right away. But fortunately, amongst that group was a young mage, which after exposing her relationship with the current leader of the Golden Cauldron, was granted the help they had asked for. This group was Daniel's hunting party, and the young mage was none other than Yala. Daniel kept approaching in front of the surprised looks of the crowd of guards, which after he got close enough, noticed the monstrous head of the commander's steelback scorpion in his hand. Chapter 27. No need for a searching party. Hey, is the tavern still open? Daniel asked to the unbelieving crowd of guards. Then, without even waiting for a reply, he walked past them and in the direction of the tavern. The guard on duty turned towards one of the patrols and said, "Notify the head hunter now." The patrol turned around and ran towards the head hunter's tent. 5 days had passed since Daniel's last meal, and he didn't feel like talking to anyone, at least until he put something in his stomach. He made his way across the base camp's quiet streets and reached the tavern in just a few minutes. In front of the head hunter's tent, the patrol was standing politely. "Sir, there are news about the kid you've sent us to look for." The tent opened immediately, and inside it, a bare-chested man appeared. The half-naked man was very large, with well-defined muscles, and a few deep scars which marked them in an unmistakable way. Behind this large man's body was a bed, above which a naked and flushed woman could be seen laying confusedly. This large man was the head hunter Kier. "What about him? Have you found him?" Kier asked in agitation. "No, sir. He came back on his own," responded the patrol awkwardly. He then composed himself and added he asked if the tavern was open. "You should be headed there." The head hunter grabbed a shirt from above his dresser and put it on messily. He then left his tent and headed towards the tavern. Daniel entered the tavern in awful conditions. His clothes were a wreck, and in his hand he carried the decapitated head of the commander scorpion, with knives still stuck in it. Despite the hour, the tavern was full. Most of the tables were occupied by a large number of people who wore the same type of armor. A full black leather armor with a mountain peak carved in silver on their chest and left shoulder. The rest of the tables were occupied by a few hunters, which for some reason looked intimidated to a point where they keep their tones down. The only empty tables were those immediately next to another isolated table. At this isolated table, 4 people were sitting. 2 of these 4 people were beautiful girls in their late teens whose revealing clothes left little to imagination. The mission of the 2 girls seemed to be to seduce the man in his early 20s next to whose sides they sat. This man's clothes were refined and elegant, and were marked with the same silver peak carved on the armors which many people within the bar wore. On his chest was a golden brooch which had the shape of a pickaxe crossed with a shovel. The hairstyle of this man alone showed a rich upbringing. The last person was a rigid-looking middle-aged man. This middle-aged man wore the exact same black leather armor that the rest wore, and long cape of a dark gray color. On the left corner of this cape, a symbol identical to the other man's brooch was sewn in silver, while on the right corner, a silver mountain peak was depicted. A silver pattern on the edges of his armor pieces, aside from the cape, was the only thing that differentiated this man's armors from the rest. Daniel slowly approached the counter and asked for any dish that didn't require a long time to prepare. He then walked towards one of the few empty tables, placed the scorpions' heads on it, and sat quietly. "What's this reek?" shouted the rich young man, now sitting less than 2 meters away from Daniel. One of the two girls giggled and responded in a coquettish manner, "Young Master Jite is right. Such a foul stench." The other girl, trying not to be left behind, added immediately, "I believe it is the tramp that just sat behind you, young Master Jite." She then giggled, while squeezing her soft peaks together with her arms. The young master turned around and noticed Daniel quietly sitting at the table behind him. He immediately got up, but as he was about to make a scene, the middle-aged man's voice resounded within his ears. It said only 2 words, "Young master." The young master immediately turned to look at the middle-aged guard, and, as their eyes met, the guard shook his head lightly. "He is just a brat," complained the young master. The guard sighed and added, "That's the head of a rank 4 beast." "So what?" shouted the young master. "Aren't you a rank 4 warrior? Kick him out of here," he then ordered. The middle-aged guard sighed once more, then got up on his feet and approached Daniel's table. "I have to ask you to leave," he said after getting only 2 meters away from Daniel. Daniel looked at him, and immediately he realized that this middle-aged guard was no simple goon. Nevertheless, he had no intention of leaving. He had spent too much time without touching food, and even if he didn't feel the passing of time while cultivating, he still felt the built-up hunger when he woke up. The fact that he hadn't jumped on another person's table to steal their food was already a miracle. The guard had no weapons on him, which told Daniel that he probably was a martial artist. He would have usually avoided a fight he had few chances of winning, but this time, Daniel decided to be stubborn. While looking at the middle-aged man, he said, "I'm going nowhere until I eat something." He then turned around once more and kept waiting quietly. The entire tavern quieted, and every single one of the soldiers in black armor turned to look at Daniel. The middle-aged guard didn't take it personally. He simply added, "This camp belongs to the mining conglomerate. My master is the young master of one of the 13 mining companies of which the conglomerate is composed. Leave while I'm still asking." Daniel ignored the man's warning completely and kept waiting for his food to arrive. The middle-aged guard raised his arm and tried to grab Daniel's shoulder. He didn't want to fight this kid, but he still had to follow his orders. But as he was about to put his hand over Daniel's shoulder, his cloak suddenly caught fire. The guard promptly took his cloak off and watched Daniel with a surprised expression. He was about to say something, but Daniel spoke first. "You should be careful around fire. Your armor may not catch fire easily, but can you say the same about your master's robe? What is that? Silk?" A faint smile grew on Daniel's face when he reached the end of his sentence. The rest of the guards rose up to their feet and grabbed the weapons hanging at their waists. The middle-aged guard reacted by raising his closed fist. This action calmed the numerous soldiers and forced them to sit back down. "You don't think that, as a martial artist, close as we are, I will be able to take you down before you can cast a magic spell?" said the leader of the young master's guard. Daniel grabbed one of the knives stuck inside the commander's steelback scorpion's decapitated head and pulled it out. He then used through stone and steel to force the knife back into the scorpion's head from another angle. He then said, "You can try." Quietness reigned within the tavern for a few endless moments. Until, ha ha, the middle-aged guard started laughing out loud. What a funny guy. Peak body strengthening and peak spiritual connection. He then sat on a chair at Daniel's table and asked with a smile on his face, "How many safe youth pills did you take to still look like a 14 years old?" Though it's kind of weird, Daniel was surprised by radical change within the old guard's behavior. He couldn't help but smirk and talk about weird, a middle-aged man that talks like a 14-year-old kid. "I have a young soul." "Ha ha ha," retorted the middle-aged guard before starting to laugh once again. The young master sprung on his feet once more and started shouting, "Are you done? I said to kick him out. Now." The middle-aged guard looked back at his master, then said with a humble yet firm voice, "Young master, we should go back to your tent so you can rest. We have to take care of the master's assignment by tomorrow morning." The few hunters that were talking and eating quietly at the other tables couldn't help but giggle at the scene. Humiliating wasn't enough to describe the young master's feelings. His orders had been ignored in public, and if that wasn't enough, he had been sent to sleep by his own bodyguard. That was an unbearable humiliation for him. As he was about to start yelling at his own guard, he noticed a massive yet messily dressed man entering the tavern. Mr. Keir. He had found a way to vent his anger and restore some of his face. The head hunter. We don't lend our camps to hunters so that they can fill them with trash. He said out loud while pointing at Daniel. I'm sorry, young Master Jite, but that young man is a member of the Huntsman Guild, and you have no authority to order a hunter around. Keir retorted immediately. This wasn't the first time that Keir had to handle one of the young masters of the 13 mining companies. The 13 companies owned all the mines situated in the canyons that the Huntsman Guild were tasked to clear, so every now and then, one or two would appear during the hunting season and act all high and mighty against a few hunters. The young master's face turned purple in rage. He sent a deadly look at Daniel and turned to face his bodyguard. Let's go. He barked through his gritted teeth. He then stormed out the tavern in large steps. The middle-aged guard followed the young master, and behind him, the rest of the guards. After the young master left, Keir approached Daniel's table and sat on one of the chairs. You're Dan Heel, right? He asked almost too politely. Daniel looked back at him and nodded. Keir, the hunter assigned as head hunter of this steelback scorpion's hunting season. In the 5 days that Daniel had been absent, Keir had received various communications from Fierce Huntsman Guild Branch. He had been requested to conduct a search party to find the disappeared member of a hunting party. At first, Keir had believed that this young man was simply the son of one of the high-ranking hunters. But after he reported his failed attempts to find him, he had learned that the request came from two external powers. One came from the Golden Cauldron's upper echelons, while the other was none other than the previous master-at-arms of the Careless Kingdom. This information, at the time, had left him shaking in his boots. You're not here to ask me to leave the tavern, right? I'm starving, said Daniel, before looking at the rank 4 scorpion skull and adding, do you think I can pay with this? Keir smirked, and then said there is no need. Your party members left your part of the pay with me. He then looked at the decapitated head above the table and added, I'll also give you the bounty for the rank 4 scorpion that the guild gave me as a reward for the incoming rank 4 hunters. Is the rest of my party fine? Asked Daniel. Keir's impression of Daniel increased exponentially after he heard him mention his teammates. The mage left right away. The old man should still be around, and the others left at some point. During these past 5 days, Daniel's eyes opened in surprise, and then asked 5 days? Is that how long I've been gone? Chapter 28, Background Developments, what do you mean? Asked Keir curiously. After Daniel realized what he had just asked, he explained himself. I've explored the caverns underneath the canyons. I wasn't really aware of the time. Keir's eyebrows arched slightly. That's what happened. Your party members said there were 2 beasts battling. What happened to them? Well, to the other one, at least the 2 beasts were grabbing each other on the ground. Daniel started to tell what had happened the day of their first hunt, of how the 2 beasts came out of a wall, how they battled fiercely and made the ground collapse, exposing the massive cage underneath it. I'm not too bad with throwing knives and using a sword. Plus, the scorpion was heavily injured. Keir was amazed by Daniel's survival ability, and after a minute, with a thoroughly impressed expression on his face, he said, well, if you want to sell the beast cores to the guild, I can pay for them. But if you want to keep them, then go ahead. You didn't accept a mission for the hunt of rank 4 beasts anyway, so you have no obligations to hand them over at that moment. A robust-looking woman appeared next to Daniel's table. In her hands, she held 2 plates filled with food. Can I ask you something? Keir asked to Daniel. As he rudely started to scarf food down his throat, how did you manage to get the attention of both the previous master-at-arms and the vice president of the Golden Cauldron? Coincidence, said Daniel with his mouth still full. He then swallowed heavily and said, I moved into the master-at-arms building. And about the vice leader of the Golden Cauldron. I guess it's because I saved the mage from bandits. Huh, talk about luck, exclaimed Keir, once again surprised. He'll let you eat in peace. Come find me tomorrow morning, and I'll give you your money. Also, Eve been asked to send you back home, said Keir, right before getting up from his chair and walking out of the tavern. The moment Keir left the tavern, the majority of the remaining hunters sprung up on their feet and approached Daniel. They occupied the free chairs or crowded around him. Hey, kiddo, tell us about the battle between the beasts. How in the hell did you manage get out of that cave? Want to play those cores in a game of cards? He for the rest of the night. Daniel became the star of the base camp's tavern. The following day, Daniel woke up on a bed inside of his tent. He washed himself up and put on some fresh clothes, then sat back on his bed and started to think about his situation. It's been almost 10 days since Eve been home, and Eve made enough money for now. I should go back. Plus, I have points to spend. I wonder if the old man would still want me as a student. On Daniel's face, a faint smile grew the moment he thought about how many skills a kingdom's master-at-arms would have to teach. With his first thoughts of greed still lingering in his mind, he walked towards Kier's office. Right outside of Kier's office, the beautiful girl that was laying naked on his bed the night prior was now completely dressed. Her expression was a professional one. "Done heal?" she asked. "That's me," replied Daniel. The woman got up from her chair and walked towards Kier's office. She then opened the door and made a gesture with her arm, inviting Daniel to enter. Inside his office, Kier was sitting behind his desk. "Dan, come sit down," said Kier. Daniel entered the office and sat on a chair in front of Kier's desk. Once comfortable, he looked at Kier and asked, "Yesterday you said that you've been asked to send me back. Was it a request from the old man or the vice leader of the Golden Cauldron?" "Both, actually," responded Kier. He then started to rummage inside his desk's drawer until it took a small bag out of it. "Hey, erase your gold and the bounty for the rank 4 beasts. I've selected a few guards that can escort you back to Fury." Daniel was about to get up and leave, but before he could, a thought flashed through his mind. "I have something to do here. Do you know where I can find someone from the Silver Peak Mining Company?" Kier's face turned awkward for a moment. "Actually, yes. But you won't like it." "What do you mean?" asked Daniel confusedly. With a matter-of-fact tone, Kier answered, "Immediately remember the young master who wanted to kick you out of the tavern?" Fuck," said Daniel dispiritedly. Kier couldn't help but ask, "Why do you need to talk to someone from the Silver Peak Mining Company?" "I wanted to buy one of their slaves." Daniel's voice grew more depressed by the word, his hand brushing against his forehead. Kier started to write something on a piece of paper and then handed it over to Daniel. "Well, if you want to avoid the guy, go directly to their main base. This is their address within the Learned District, but I doubt you'll be allowed in," he said. Daniel kept the piece of paper inside his new shirt and said, "Thank you. I owe you one." Kier smirked and said, "I'll collect that debt when one of your favors will be worth something." 1 hour later, Daniel had reached the base camp's border. Waiting for him was a group of people. Amongst this group of people was a familiar face. Wearing his usual mimetic attire and carrying his usual bunch of throwing spears, Garth sat quietly next to a tree, ignoring the rest of the chatting members of the group. Most of the group's members were silver rank mercenaries, while the remaining few had a gold badge hanging from their belts. "So that fall didn't kill you." "I owe a few copper to the youngster with the weird nose," said Garth with a fake disappointed tone. Daniel looked at him and smiled. He then said, "If you thought I was dead, what are you doing still here?" "Long naps," mostly responded Garth while smirking. After a couple more back and forth, the two approached the rest of the group. They then departed for Fury. Fury, Master-at-Arms Hotel in the lobby, sitting around a table, were the old Akemist and Rayla. 2 days had passed since the old Master-at-Arms and the old alchemist had received the news of Daniel's return. Since then, they had started a sort of competition about who would manage to take him in first. They were opposites. The Master-at-Arms was an expert in all kinds of weapons and a powerful cultivator at the 7th rank of martial cultivation, while the old alchemist was a known alchemist, a powerful mage, and a 7th rank spiritual cultivator. Both of them had learned about Daniel's prodigious talent in cultivation and learning, either by witnessing it themselves or, like in the case of the old alchemist, witnessed from his granddaughter. Both of these figures had built huge reputations within the Careless Kingdom. The ways of the Master-at-Arms had always been honest and direct, while the old alchemist's ways were more cunning and calculative. During their many years of friendship, they had challenged each other more than once, and this time, the challenge regarded gaining a talented disciple. Naturally, they were more than aware that the decision would depend on Daniel's choice regarding his path of cultivation, path which the Master-at-Arms was fairly convinced to be martial cultivation. And yet, the old alchemist still tried to put a few fast ones on his old friend, like befriending Daniel's sister, Rayla. had always been a good kid, said Rayla to the old man, with eyes filled with unrelenting pride. The girl's pride made the old alchemist smile warmly. He had talked to this diffident and sharp teenage girl for the past half an hour, and he had understood one thing. Gaining her trust was a feat. I am sure he is. I can't wait to thank him personally for saving my granddaughter's life. The old alchemist finished his tea and added it was a pleasure talking to such a bright kid, and my apologies for interrupting your studies. They'll leave you to them. Excuse me, you didn't disturb, sir, said Rayla while smiling politely and blowing gently. After bidding farewell, the old alchemist left. Back inside the master-at-arms room, the two old men were sitting and chatting like they often did. What a couple of freaks, said the old alchemist with an annoyed tone. I've talked to that girl for half an hour, and I know less about that kid than I did before. The old master-at-arms clearly enjoyed seeing his old friend in that state. He decided to poke the bear by saying, "Oh, she's just protective toward her brother." Which older sister wouldn't be worried if a suspicious old man started to ask questions about their little brother? Who's a suspicious old man? You want to talk. Opening a school on your own. Attracting kids from left and right. You're the one that they need to be on the lookout for, retorted the old alchemist bitterly. The old master-at-arms didn't take the comment at heart. He instead giggled and went back to sipping his tea. A look of realization flashed on the old alchemist's face. He then looked at the old master-at-arms and asked him, didn't the brat come here with two girls? Who's the other one? The faint smile on the hotel owner's face disappeared completely. He stared at his teacup for a full minute before saying in a low voice to his daughter. The old alchemist's eyes flashed open. Are you kidding? How in the hell did she end up in your hotel to begin with? That's too much of a coincidence, he inquired with an everlasting surprise in his voice. She had been taken as a slave. The brat bought her at an auction and then freed her before even leaving the building, clarified the old master-at-arms. The old alchemist smirked and said, smart kid. He could see the big picture. Think of who's going to owe him a favor when. If. His father will come back. He didn't know who she was when he bought her, said the old master-at-arms, correcting his old friend's train of thought. Once learned the truth, the smile on the old alchemist grew 2 times larger the more I hear about this brat. The more I like him. Hee after the old alchemist's laugh. The two finished their tea in silence. 2 quiet minutes passed before the old alchemist broke the silence by asking, you are keeping her here? I have to, responded the old master-at-arms. The old alchemist's brows narrowed as he looked at his old friend. Students of the School of Everlasting Fury will sooner or later make their way here. You haven't refused anyone since you've taken the 3. You can't start with them. ITLL looks suspicious. What if they send someone who can recognize her? He asked with a dead serious tone. The old master-at-arms looked lost for a moment. Then, he seemed to have made a decision within his mind. He turned to look at his friend and said, nobody touches one of my students. You better hope it doesn't come to that. Eve heard that the master of the School of Everlasting Fury has been trying to break through to the 8 rank for days now, said the old alchemist casually, trying to scale back his old friend's resolve to fight it out with his student's old enemy. He then added, plus, you're not the master-at-arms anymore. If His Majesty finds out, he'll never take your side over his. The room turned quiet once more, and after a few minutes, the first to break the silence was once again the old alchemist. Where the hell is that brat? I feel like I've been waiting here forever. The old alchemist complained in a way most would define slightly childish. He'll be here by tomorrow, responded the old master-at-arms. Chapter 29, A Strange Day. It was early morning when Daniel's group arrived at Fierce Gates. They entered the city from the southern walls, and once in, Daniel bid farewell to Garth and the rest, and headed towards the hotel. He really wanted to see his sister. Once in front of the building, Daniel stood with his jaw wide open. The amount of people lingering in front of the building's entrance was incomparable to the one he had left behind. In fact, there were so many people that, weren't they all young men in their early 20s or late teens, he would have believed that the old man had reopened the hotel. Daniel tried to push his way into the building when, hey, don't skip the line, said a young man in tight, yet refined clothes. Slightly annoyed, Daniel tried to explain himself. Actually, I live, but he was interrupted by other voices. A girl in her late teens, which was hugging three-sheathed short sword, said sourly, actually what? We've been here for hours. Even if you were the long-lost children of the previous master-at-arms, you still have to wait for your turn. Daniel gritted his teeth in annoyance. He then tried once more. I was just saying that but he was interrupted again. To the back of the line, said another young man, which wore refined clothes. Each of these young men and women were the geniuses that came from the groups placed outside the city of Fury. The first group that had managed to secure a place within the old Master-at-Arms building were members of the powers within the city, which, whereas they lived nearby, they had arrived earlier. The rest needed more time to arrive. Daniel was slowly pushed on the borders of the crowd and at the back of the line. Fine. He wasn't willing to wait in line to enter his own house, so instead of waiting, he located an open window on the frontal wall of the building and started to walk towards the wall. The people who were patiently waiting in line noticed Daniel walking toward a wall with conviction. Their puzzled looks rapidly turned into ones of mockery and derision. From their point of view, Daniel had gone crazy. Daniel kept walking until there were just 5 meters between him and the wall. He then lifted his leg, as if walking over the first step of a set of stairs, and before his foot could touch the ground, a stone stair rose from the ground, then another and another. Daniel walked over this set of stairs, which disappeared as soon as he moved onto the next. He kept going until he reached the open window, crawled inside it, and closed it. The people on the ground looked at one another in silent confusion. The first to talk was the young girl, which was embracing the short swords. Is that allowed? On the other side of the window, which Daniel had entered from, was a messy room. Daniel wanted to make a beeline for door, but as he heard laughs and giggles on the other side, he had no choice but to hide in a dark corner of the room instead. In front of him, a young couple appeared. The young man and woman were embracing each other and crashing against every piece of furniture within the room. From the verses and mess the two were making, Daniel wasn't sure if the two were kissing or trying to kill each other. Needless to say, Daniel was embarrassed beyond words. He could only try to reduce the space he occupied and stay as quiet as possible. The two started to take pieces of clothing off of each other, throwing them around randomly. Daniel was trying to find the right way to sneak out of the room when suddenly an endowment landed on his head. Daniel stood as still as a statue. Then, after making sure the couple hadn't noticed him, he slowly raised his hand and pinched the piece of clothing that was resting over his head. He felt the soft fabric, and for a moment, he thought that a soft pair of female's undergarment had landed on him. But when his eyes landed on the item, he noticed the familiar shape of the piece of clothing. They were a pair of men's undergarment. Fuck, that's it, shouted Daniel loudly. He then threw the young man's underwear on the ground, and while covering his face with his large sleeve, he stormed out of the room in rage. The couple had been scared to death. The two quickly rose up from the bed, as their eyes rapidly explored the room. They then noticed the figure dashing towards the door. When the young man noticed Daniel, he said, "Hey, hold on, AM." But before he could finish, a small fireball flew in his direction and exploded right in his face. The girl covered her face by instinct, but all she heard was the sound of the door opening and closing. She then looked to her right and noticed the shocked look in her boyfriend's face and his slightly burnt hair. Daniel ran through corridors as if a demon was chasing him. He had no intention of being seen there when the rumors would start to spread. The first thing Daniel did was to go back to his room and change his clothes. He then walked out and went to knock at his sister's room. Unfortunately, nobody answered. He was about to walk away when a sweet-sounding voice reached his ears from behind. "You're back." Daniel turned around and saw Maya. She was as beautiful as ever, and if compared to the state she was in when he freed her, she seemed to have even recovered a bit of her personality. Daniel smiled at her, then said, "I am. How have you been doing?" Maya still felt a bit of embarrassment when talking to Daniel. He had done a great favor to her and had never asked for anything in return. Behaving naturally with someone to whom she owed so much was extremely difficult to her. "I'm doing great. I love this place," she responded just as politely, then added, "How did your hunting trip go?" "Fruitful. I went to tea." Daniel hadn't spent much time with Maya, but his opinion of her was that of a sweet girl which had led a difficult life. She had also been the first person whose life Daniel had saved, so he couldn't help but feel responsible for her. The two talked for a bit, then Daniel, unable to find his sister, went to see the building owner. He arrived at the building owner's room and heard talking coming from the other side. He knocked. After a few moments, he heard an old voice saying, "Come in." Daniel opened the door and entered the building owner's room. Inside it, he found two old men sitting at the table and drinking tea like they often did. "Finally!" exclaimed the old alchemist loudly. He then sprung up from his chair and dashed towards Daniel. His hand moved before Daniel could react and grabbed his wrist. "Huh! The brat is at the peak of spiritual connection. There is no way he is a martial cultivator," said the old alchemist at the old master-at-arms, as a scary smirk grew on his face. Daniel retracted his hand and looked at the old master-at-arms with an inquisitive look. The old master-at-arms placed his teacup on the table and said, "This is the vice leader of the Golden Cauldron. You saved his granddaughter a week ago." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He hadn't received a proper thank you from the old man, but he still couldn't afford to act rudely. He bowed his head slightly and introduced himself. "Greetings, sir. My name is Dan Heel." Hey, don't be so formal. "I'm here to thank you for saving my beloved granddaughter." "Haha," said the old alchemist with an oddly friendly attitude. Daniel looked at the two old men and said, "I came here to thank you for sending a rescue party to find me." He then bowed once again. "That's the least we could have done," responded the old alchemist promptly, then added, "I've heard from my granddaughter that you have a talent for spiritual cultivation. Say, would you like to join my golden cauldron and become one of my students? Might not look like it, but I'm a powerful mage myself." Daniel had expected such an invitation. He had doubted that such a prominent figure like the vice leader of one of the biggest groups within the Careless Kingdom would order for his rescue simply to thank him. So he had prepared an answer in advance. "I'm honored by the opportunity, sir, but I haven't decided yet which cultivation path to take. I just..." He then made a saddened expression and shook his head as if cursing his unlucky fate. The two old men, within their minds, scoffed at Daniel's pitiful attempt of swindling them. They knew exactly what Daniel wanted, but still, they feigned ignorance. The old alchemist asked with curiosity, "What's the matter?" "You can tell us. I just wish I had learned more about the two types of cultivation, so that I could choose my path," responded Daniel with a voice full of self-hatred. The old master-at-arms was the first to talk this time. He said, "How about this? We'll teach you martial arts and magic for a week. You will then decide which path suits you better." He let the words sink in Daniel's mind, and then continued, "Then, after you break through to the 4th rank, you can take one of us as your teacher." The three were all aware of the hidden meanings behind the other's words, just as they knew that the other parties were acting, but for some reason, none of them interrupted the charade. An enormous smile grew on Daniel's face as he took a deep bow and said, "Thank you, sirs." On the faces of the two old men, a faint smile grew. The moment Daniel straightened his back, the old master-at-arms said, "Don't worry about it. You can go now. Go see your sister. She is waiting for you in the lobby. Oh, and try to stay out of other people's room. Train starts tomorrow." Embarrassment and a bit of anger appeared on Daniel's face as he bowed slightly and left the room. "I like the brat. It's been a while since the last time a kid his age didn't puke his guts out when meeting both of us at the same time. Remember the brat of the Trickley house?" said the old alchemist, right after being once again alone with his old friend. The old master-at-arms remembered when that happened, and a nostalgic smile appeared on his face. "I recall the reason for that being your previous invention of the high wolf repellent. Honestly, I still don't know how I managed to avoid puking myself. You smelled like a sewer." "Uncalled for," retorted the old alchemist. When Daniel reached the lobby, he sighted Rayla sitting at a coffee table. Next to her were a few young men and women. Daniel recognized these people. They were Riri, the girl with the folding fan, Nilo, the martial artist in leather armor, and Finn, the handsome-looking rapier wielder. The four were chatting happily while drinking tea. Rayla was enjoying looking at how casually the other three treated each other. They were all proud children of powerful groups within Fury, and aside from Nilo, whom they met later, they had grown up together. At first, Rayla felt a stranger amongst this small group of friends, but in the past 10 days, she slowly became friendly with Riri, the most friendly amongst the two disciples of the Folding Crane School. The many interaction with Riri had led her to meet and interact with Nilo and Finn more often. And in the end, she had managed to befriend them as well. The four's chatter could be heard through the entire lobby until a voice interrupted them. Sister. Chapter 30 Intensive Training Part 1 Sister. Came Daniel's faint voice from behind Rayla's back. Rayla turned around and found her brother standing behind her. Dan! She exclaimed before springing up on her feet and running to give him a hug. After a few seconds, she pushed her brother away and started checked his body thoroughly for injuries. Have you grown taller? She then asked jokingly. It's only been 10 days, responded Daniel with a faint smile on his face. Rayla sighed in relief when noticing her brother's healthy state. She then asked, how did your trip go? Tell me everything. Her bright and beautiful eyes glowing with curiosity. For the next few minutes, Daniel told the tale of his journey to his sister, of what happened with their escort, of how they had saved a mage from the Golden Cauldron, and how he ended up stuck in a cave with two rank 4 beasts. During the entire story, Rayla stood as tense as a bowstring. On the other hand, the faces of Anilo, Finn, and Riri, which were still sitting at the table nearby the two siblings, had contorted in shock. They had finally understood the reason why the vice leader of the Golden Cauldron had stayed to the old man's hotel until now. Of course, the three were martial cultivators and weapon wielders at that, but they still were more than aware of who the old alchemist was, as his fame was on par with the old master-at-arms. When it seemed like Daniel's story had reached an end, Nilo approached the two Ray. We're going back to train, said Nilo, dressed in his usual leather armor and bram braces. Rayla turned around and looked at him, her eyebrows raised in realization. She then said, oh, so rude. Nilo, Finn, Riri, this is my brother Dan. She then turned toward Daniel and continued, Dan, these are Nilo, Finn, and Riri we've already met, responded Daniel. Riri was the first one to greet Daniel. A pleasure to meet you, Dan. I heard that you're the one to thank for this opportunity, said Riri with a polite smile on her face while indicating the hotel with her eyes. And I have to thank your monstrous talent for the private lesson, added Nilo. Daniel wasn't familiar with Riri and Finn, but he had a decent impression of Nilo. He hadn't treated him with disrespect the first time they had met, and had been smart enough to make use of an opportunity the day he had trained in weapon wielding. There's no need to mention it, responded Daniel with a polite smile on his face. I should thank you for bearing with my. The five chatted for a bit before Daniel bid farewell and left by himself to his room. Daniel hadn't slept on a bed for a while now, so the moment he entered his room, he took his clothes off and dropped on his bed, falling asleep almost immediately. The morning after, Daniel went to meet with the two old men. The three spent a few minutes talking, stopping only after agreeing on a training schedule for Daniel. The training schedule comprehended 5 hours of martial training in the morning and 5 hours of spiritual training in the evening. Another long day had started for Daniel. Training ground. 8 o'clock, Daniel stood quietly in front of the old master-at-arms. Dozens of practitioners looked at him with pure envy shining in their eyes. They had come all the way to Fury just to get a chance just like the one Daniel had received, and instead, they were forced to practice by themselves, quietly hoping to be noticed. Naturally, they had no right to complain, as the old man had never agreed on teaching anything to anyone, and they inhabited the hotel as tenants, not students. That hadn't stopped them from crowding the area around Daniel and the old man, so that they could listen to the old man's words. Mastery of true motion, shadow approach, and finally key rush. These are the 3 martial skills that I will teach you, said the old man. The moment the old master-at-arms had started listing these skills, shivers ran through the spines of each person within the surrounding crowd. Every one of these skills were not only top-notch, but also essential for every martial cultivator. The old man had thought this through. He wanted to teach Daniel advanced techniques, which would help him in dealing with long-ranged enemies, like mages. Considering that the old master-at-arms and the old alchemist were now in competition, Daniel had expected as much. Fortunately, that was also what Daniel had hoped for, since he could easily find manuals for weapon wielding, while instead, books that described profound martial arts were impossible to find. The diffusion of profound martial arts was strictly kept in check by schools of martial arts and sections. After all, the lower the number of groups that could teach a profound martial art was, the more prestige those groups would have and the more students they would attract. That was also the reason why, for members of sects and schools of martial arts, sharing martial arts with outsiders was forbidden. Families were no different. A family could not make his rise in power only through money. They also required powerful martial or spiritual cultivators to keep them safe, otherwise they would end up being swallowed by another power sooner or later. Many amongst the family's ancestors had developed powerful martial arts in the past. The three skills which the old master-at-arms had decided to teach Daniel were ancient techniques and belonged to disappeared schools of martial arts and sections. That was the reason why, the moment he started explaining the first one, every single person within the crowd stopped their practice and started to take notes instead. The old man didn't care about this. These skills were not that easily learned, as even geniuses would need to be corrected and advised through their training, or the mistakes they made would stick with their mastery of the skill forever. The old man, when deciding which skills to teach him, had taken into account Daniel's monstrous talent in practicing martial arts. After witnessing how Daniel had learned the basics of true motion without needing anything but the skill's method, the old man had realized that Daniel's talent stood within finding his own mistakes and correcting them by himself. That was monstrous capability, which he had seen in many prodigies in the past, but never used to this extent. The first skill the old master-at-arms explained was true motion. After a rapid introduction of the skill, the old man started to explain its most intricate details and methods, how to use it to prevent your enemy from reading your body, how to use it along with weapon wielding, and many others. The many young men and women within the crowd had difficulties in keeping up with the old man's words. They started to doubt that the old master-at-arms was really willing to teach the skill, and that he was instead holding a lecture. Every martial art had a different way to indicate the practitioner's mastery. Some skill stages were indicated in ranks, while others were indicated in stages. True motion was divided into 4 stages, which were basic motion, intermediate motion, advanced motion, and perfect motion. Daniel's master true motion was at the basic stage. Many groups had secured the basic manuals of true motion. Reason why Nilo had been able to easily take it out. Unfortunately, a person who had mastered the skill was required in order to pass it on to another. And by now, aside from a few cultivators from powerful groups within the Careless Kingdom, nobody but the old and current master-at-arms had the necessary mastery of the skill to pass it on to someone. Not wanting to lose the chance, the mini cultivator that assisted to the explanation and demonstrations of the martial skill started to practice it. The old man ignored the other practitioners and instead focused all of his attention on Daniel. Daniel started to practice the intermediate stages of true motion, following the old man's instructions. His progress were surprising as always, and yet, Daniel's view of martial arts started to change. By the end of the 5 hours of practice, despite activating the system's skill time is precious, he still hadn't managed to reach the state of intermediate motion. That day, Daniel had realized the differences in difficulty between learning the basics and the more advanced stages of martial skills, and from that, he had understood one thing. The difference was abysmal. The people within the crowd started to go back to their practice, their face filled with disappointment. They had found the old man's teachings to be too rushed, and in the end, they had convinced themselves that, instead of a private lesson, it looked more like a one-way educated exchange about martial arts. Daniel decided to go for lunch at a restaurant with Maya and his sister Rayla. When they reached the restaurant, Rayla told Daniel that she had invited some people over as well. Inside the restaurant, sitting at a table, were Finn, Riri, Nilo, and Miri. Daniel noticed Miri right away and felt slightly awkward about eating along someone which had treated him as an inferior and even attacked him. Unfortunately, now Rayla and Riri had become friends, so the chances of the two running out into each other wasn't as rare. At the table, 5 of them chatted happily while eating. The only quiet ones were Daniel and Nairi. Daniel didn't mind this, as his thoughts were still focused on his previous training. Unfortunately, his train of thought was interrupted by Riri's voice, which said to him, "I've heard that the old master at arms is teaching you true motion. That's amazing. Too bad I wasn't in the training grounds then. I practiced true motion as well, and who knows, maybe I could have learned something." Finn interjected by saying that was hardly a lesson. "I was there. It felt more like a master passing down knowledge to another master." His handsome face then showed hints of disappointment. Before continuing, it was more like taking a glimpse from detailed manual of martial art. The next person who spoke was Nilo. He said in a half-serious, half-joking manner, "Maybe, when Daniel will master true motion, he can teach us." One had to understand one thing about the master-at-arms figure. A kingdom's master-at-arms was a prodigy which was born within said kingdom, and his or her job consisted in safekeeping and passing down martial arts. When a powerful school of martial arts, sect, or family was on the path of decline, their most secret skills would be passed on to the kingdom's master-at-arms. Declining powers had more than one reason for doing this. One of them was to declare to the cultivation world that the group had lost its power. But the most important reason for passing on their arts to the master-at-arms was to prevent them from being lost in time. Once passed on, the martial art would not exactly belong to the master-at-arms, as he wasn't allowed to release it to the public. The only thing he was allowed to do with it was to pass it on to a suitable cultivator, in case he found one. True Motion belonged to a long-lost sect called Undeniable True Motion Sect. When the sect had declined, the kingdom's master-at-arms of the time had inherited the skill. He had then passed the skill down to the following master-at-arms and to a few worthy students. Unfortunately, these students didn't have what it took to completely master the skill. So through the slow passage of time, the only knowledge of true motion that was free to the public were the basics. Those who inherited a martial art from a master-at-arms were allowed to make use of it however they wished. So, while Nilo was half joking, the fact that, in case Daniel was able to master true motion, he would have the full rights to pass it on, still remained.